Good morning. There's a slight change in the bulletin this morning. We won't be reading what's printed in your bulletin. We're going to be reading this morning from Isaiah and Matthew. Isaiah 60 verses 1 through 6 and Matthew chapter 2 verses 1 through 12. Maybe Julia had an epiphany last night and decided to change it. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah and all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. In Matthew we read, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judea. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage. When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left their own country by another road. Here ends the reading of the scriptures this morning.
Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The North Star, called Polaris by astronomers, is our most literal guiding star. And it is special because it is the only star in the night sky that hardly appears to move. It appears fixed because it is located directly above the rotation axis of the Earth. Wesleyan astronomy professor Meredith Hughes, who's been here before, says if we were relaxing with Santa Claus after Christmas at the North Pole, it would be directly overhead. Anywhere in the Earth's northern hemisphere, if you can find the North Star, points you in the direction of the north. But Professor Hughes also told me that Polaris, the little star at the end of the handle of the Little Dipper, won't always be the North Star. It hasn't always been the North Star. The rotation of the axis of the Earth wobbles due to a phenomenon called precession, and it moves in a predictable circle in the sky over the course of about 26,000 years. We're just lucky to have a bright star over the North Pole right now. The southern hemisphere is not so lucky. Back when Jesus was born, there was no bright star near the North Pole. So people then would have used a different star to guide them. Medieval writers thought it must have been an angel that the three wise men saw, perhaps the angel that appeared to the shepherds. That is what led them to the manger. As we all know, due to the lack of sometimes natural darkness with all of our bright lights, stars appear bright when it's dark out. And that is to say, metaphorically, when we can't see where we are going, we pay closest attention to the things that might point us in the right direction. Mary Lou Brady told me that when she was, and I have her permission, by the way, that when she was in the darkest valley of her life, when her oldest child, her firstborn, had tremendous health complications, that her prayer life changed. Instead of asking God to manipulate their surroundings, to change the outcomes, she prayed for her own strength, to put one foot in front of the other, for courage. Mary Lou and the deacons decided to ask these central questions during the time of Advent leading up to Christmas. What is your light in the dark? Your guiding star. How do you get to the nativity scene through the dark? And which character do you relate to the most in the nativity scene? We had 4 different families give really wise, funny, powerful, beautiful testimonies. We learned about a walrus and a rhino, astronauts, and army characters that aren't traditionally in the creche. Do you remember that? We invited the rest of the congregation to write on these stars to answer one of these questions. And we weren't sure what we would get, but we recorded the answers. We wanted a way to connect our own stories to the Christmas stories. And here are some of the responses. 5 of us related to Mary. As someone who cared deeply for other people, as a mother figure, as having never-ending love for her firstborn. 1 of us related to the woman who helped Mary give birth, somebody who didn't make it into the story. 2 of us related to Mary and Joseph as a family unit, and 4 of us related to Joseph as a quiet caregiver, the outsider, the bystander, as someone who was asked to have faith beyond reason. 3 of us related to baby Jesus, some reasons being because babies bring new life to families, and feeling grateful to God to have come in the form of a baby so that we can want to love and care for God unconditionally. 9 of us related to the shepherds because they were among the animals under the stars, close to the earth, always working. They showed joy and excitement over the birth of Jesus. And 10 of us related to the animals themselves. And if you want to hear more about this, there are great reasons. This is a plug for second hour. Other answers fell more under the category of, what is your light in the dark? Among them, the celebration of the cycles of life and seasons, humble beginnings, peace, caring and worth in the cold and dark, family, love, community, seeing the proud faces of the children as they carry the figures to the creche. We loved these answers. We realized this sort of task, writing something down, handing it forward, had the potential to come off as hokey, childish, but sometimes it is good to activate that part of ourselves. And we really wanted to get the heart of relating our own stories to the Christmas story, and to be honest with ourselves when we couldn't relate. And now, once we have asked these questions, because Epiphany is the link between the Christmas story and the rest of the journey toward Easter, we ask the question, where do we go from here? We have just entered the new year, a very sacred time of the year, because if we follow the Christian narrative, we have new intention. We have just witnessed hope and light born into the world anew. And finally, the days are growing longer. Arise, your light has come, says Isaiah. The question then becomes, how do we carry that light of Christ with us into the new year? And I want to propose a technique, not necessarily for planning and plotting the future, for we often make plans and God laughs, but rather a technique for approaching the future, for getting beyond our own gridlocks, and for truly evolving as human beings and as a community collectively. Diane Butler Bass claims that every 500 years or so, historically, there is a great religious shift or a reformation. And we, friends, are in that time now. And the path is not mapped for us. And there aren't charts predicting what it will look like. The technique I want to propose is called Dead Reckoning. And I borrow it from Edwin Friedman, who says that this technique is essentially how Europe got out of the Dark Ages and how Columbus charted a path to America. Now, every one of us knows how problematic it is to lift up Christopher Columbus because of the atrocities against the indigenous communities. But Columbus was able to, in a sense, discover the New World, where all other explorers of that era had necessarily failed to do so. And he was a terrible map reader. Dead reckoning is the capacity to chart a course through one's own constant micro-measurements, rather than relying on the use of someone else's map. In essence, it's a kind of biofeedback with one's own environment. Edwin Friedman defines his skill of dead reckoning in emotional terms as a strange mix of dreaming and determination, and a bold new relationship between risk and reality. But more importantly, he uses this to illustrate the kind of faith and daring that is always required by us if we are to ever break free from our own emotional ruts in order to discover new territory. Celestial navigation, similar to dead reckoning, is the art and science of finding one's geographical position by means of astronomical observations, by measuring celestial objects, the stars, the sun, the moon, the planets. So where do we go from here? I think this church is great at taking risks and not being attached to successful outcomes. And this will be key for our not just survival, but for our thriving and being real and authentic with ourselves and one another as we seek to evolve collectively into the next era of our lives. And this is not map making. It is cultivating an attitude toward the future, one that I think we already have, and that we will encourage each other to grow into. An attitude of curiosity and risk, of not worrying about surviving, because that will fling us into safety and continuity with our faith, rather than evolution. Yesterday, someone who is self-proclaimed anti-religious asked me, thinking this would be a Trump question, well, how do you feel about the decline of Protestant traditions? You've just started your career, you might not have a job. And I said, probably trying to shock her also, but also being honest, I think it's great. We are supposed to evolve, and what is meant to die will die, and what is actually bringing healing and love into the world where there is oppression and pain, that will continue. And we can reach deep back into our past and chart our paths to the future together. And she was actually satisfied with that answer. People who are anti-religious don't scare me, even though my livelihood depends on it. With the birth of Christ, symbolically we enter a new cycle. And stars have life cycles just like people. Although stellar life cycles are much longer than human lifespans, we see stars being born out of cocoons of gas and dust, living out their adult lives like the sun, and dying in varied ways, violently, beautifully, or quietly and peacefully, just like humans. Even things that appear to be fixed points are impermanent. So what will be our guiding star? Or rather, how will we follow it? Amen.